Hey everyone, hope you're all having a terrific Wednesday. I felt like today I'd make a video kind of talking about some study tips, seeing how I'm a tutor, and I've been a tutor now since, I guess, 2013, so what does that make that? 6 years? 6 years? I've been doing tutoring professionally for, I guess, 6 years now. And some things that I've kind of picked up as a tutor, I like to kind of share that in this video. So the thing that I always try to show students whenever we begin a tutoring session is that when you're studying for something, the easiest thing to start to accept is that whatever you're learning is finite. Okay, Physics 1 ends, quantum mechanics, the study of quantum mechanics does not end, but quantum mechanics, introduction to quantum mechanics ends, electromagnetism ends, chemistry 1 ends, it all ends. Okay, so if you can understand that that's going to end and that there's a finite amount of information that you're going to need to know, you can start to put together a study plan and how you're going to approach that course. And I think that that's the most important thing, is having a reasonable plan and reasonable expectations about how you can do well in the class. So that's my first real piece of practical advice when it comes to studying for anything, really, is just accept that this can be done. You're not going to understand everything, and it's never going to be perfect, but you'll understand enough to say that you took that course, and the easiest way is to look at problems and say, how would someone who has not been studying this course approach this problem, and how would someone who is taking this course approach this problem? That's a very good question to ask yourself whenever you're working on problems. So the other piece of advice, I want to break this down to 3 things. 1 is building the mindset for the course. 2 is preparing for exams, studying, all that stuff. And 3 is my approach to solving problems. So the second piece that I really want to get into is, how do you prepare for the class? What types of things have I found to be successful with some of the students I work with? I've come to find out that if students read the chapter before they go into class, they're more likely to retain the information. I don't know if that's backed by studies, but it's really backed by the sheer number of people that I've tutored. They've said that that's been a really invaluable piece of advice, to read before they go into class. And when I say read before you go into class, I don't mean just anything. I mean, you have to work with your teacher and say, what are we going to be covering this week? And then in the morning or before class, if it's the evening class, like at lunch or something, try and figure out the time where you can sit down and you can actually get that done, because it's really helpful. You have to look at learning as trying to understand a language. You can't just walk in and expect to understand everything. It's confusing on purpose, because someone's up there speaking in a foreign language and you don't speak the language. But if you kind of prime yourself and you read a chapter and you do a couple of examples out of that chapter, then you're more likely to be able to walk in and understand what they're talking about. So that's really important. When you are reading your book, one tip that I have is to look through all of the pages in the chapter and just kind of look at the graphs and the bulleted points and the bold font things, because what that does is helps you create a mental map, so you understand why you're going to be reading something and where it's going to kind of go in the end. You just have the gist of what the chapter is, just pictures, words, titles, stuff like that you can kind of scratch at, that you think this is what the author's trying to get at. Okay, and then when you're done, don't just close the book up and walk away. The other thing is, close the book, try and explain what that chapter was about to yourself, open the book, flip back through the pages. Okay, was your explanation sufficient? If it was, cool, move on. If not, you really got to rehash those things, because you're really just testing yourself right there. It's going to happen one way or another. It's either going to show up on a test, or it's going to show up in homework, or it's going to show up in class if you don't know the material. And it's better for you to just get out of the way by explaining it to yourself. The last piece of advice that I have is working through problems, and how you can work through some problems and use that as a really good studying technique for taking an exam. So when you work through problems, you're going to be able to perform better on an exam. A lot of students are like, I've read the chapter, I'm good. Just because the teacher's not assigning homework doesn't mean that you shouldn't be doing homework. You should be doing something, some hand-mind coordinating thing that's going to make you retain the information. So whenever I work with students, if the teacher's not assigning homework, well, we go and we find homework. one way or another. We have to try and do it. And we do it by breaking down what's being covered in the chapters, and if we have to go online, we find some resources, we find some practice problems related to those very specific chapters, and we try to work through them. But usually if you're lucky and your teacher's assigning homework and you know what's going to be expected, really go through your homework and do all the problems. And when you finish a problem, this is how you can kind of speed up the process of getting your homework done. It's kind of slow in the beginning, but eventually it'll make it easier to move through problems. Stop at the end of the problem and then work your way back up the levels to try and explain how you went from the beginning to the end, and then how you go from the end to the beginning. If you can do that, it's a very good way to understand problems very deeply. Okay, so after you finish your homework, if you can, just try and take 1 or 2 problems and reinvent them. Just doesn't have to be like every problem. Just try and take a problem and recreate it with different numbers. Because if you can do that, you're basically making a test question. So when you see that on the test, you're not going to be spooked when it's different numbers or they bring in some variable that you weren't expecting, because you're going to be able to just read the question and kind of know what they're going to ask. And that gets back to the first point. It's a finite class. It ends at some point. So if you're able to recreate problems, that's what you're doing. You're mastering you're mastering the expectation level for this class. Like, you're going to be able to go out and see these problems and know how to apply the methods that you're learning, or apply whatever you're learning in this class to those problems. So last thing is, how can you use that homework to help prepare for an exam? Just make a test. Just make a test. Okay, if you know how many questions, if you're fortunate enough that someone tells you what's going to be on a test, awesome. But my experience is really not the case. So there's really not a lot you can do on that first test. They're just going to give you that first test and you're going to have to take it. And what I would say is, here's an example. Say it's like calculus or whatever. Pick 15. You're going to have to do 15 problems probably on the test, 1 hour exam, whatever. Find the sections that are going to be covered, and then pick a set of easy problems. Do like 4 easy problems, 6 intermediate problems, and 5 hard problems. Sounds like an exam, right? Probably will be the exam. And I usually, like 2 out of 3 times, I can get that exam down to like exactly what's being asked. It's kind of weird, but also pretty expected, because the material is finite and ends, and like if you know what's going to be asked, if you've been tutoring in that particular subject like me for so many years, you know what's going to be asked. And so I try to share that with students so that they can kind of do that at a very basic level. It's not going to be perfect, but it's better than going in without any, idea of what's going to be on the exam. Because now you have a worked out exam that you made yourself. And the day of the test, if you do that as a warm up, you're going in with more confidence in the exam. And a lot of people probably don't think that that's very important, but I really do think that an exam is about 60% knowledge and 40% controlling your physiological response to the anxiety of taking the exam. I really do think that that's the case. So if you find these tips helpful, I'm always trying to put out a video providing very practical advice, and it can be anything. So if you like this content, subscribe and you'll definitely get more. Thank you for watching.